Hi all, this is Jeanette Keynes from Jewelry Arts Inc. In this video, I'm going to show you some important concepts having to do with inner bezels for setting faceted stones. There are a lot of misconceptions about how to make them and how to treat them in there, so I'm going to show you my best methods. So I want you to take a look at this sexy sapphire I have here. Look at that color. Could you not go apeshit? Love it. Oh, so juicy. So I just made a little stack ring, which are relatively, quite simple rings, because really the whole point of these is just to show off the stone. You wear a bunch of them together, so then they're just like this perfect little, holding it up. Exactly. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about inner bezels, because inner bezels is a topic that gets people all verstuckene, you know what I mean? So for people who work in thicker materials, like 1 millimeter thick, like they're casting and stuff like that, normally when you set a faceted stone, you're going to use a burr or something like that, and you're going to make a seat, and that's what's going to hold the stone. Now for us, we tend to work in thinner materials, like most of our bezels are 26 gauge. So for us, obviously 26 gauge is quite thin. You're not going to like be grinding a seat in there or else. Exactly. So for us, we make an inner bezel that holds up the stone at exactly the right height, so like each stone's a little different, but I'll give you like my best tips on how to do it right. So if I'm getting ready to do my inner bezel, I'm going to take my pair of dividers and I'm going to just hold this up against here, and I'm going to look for, like 2/3-ish. So what we're talking about is 2/3. 2/3 is the most important thing when you're making your inner bezel, because all faceted stones are a little bit different. They have different cuts, etc., etc. So the 2/3 gets you, I would say, usually about 90% there. You're always going to have to, like at the end when you're ready to set, you're going to put it in, you're going to put the stone in, and you're going to check the height, and maybe you raise it a little, maybe you lower it a little, but 2/3 gets you very close. So that's the most important thing there.
2/3 of the outer bezel. We're just saying 2/3, but, but I think we should explain.
2/3 the height of the outer bezel, in case I was not clear. I'll just adjust this and we'll get a visual.
There we go.
That's what happens when there's a time lapse, Start to lose track of what I said. So 2/3-ish. I mean, and by the way, also to be clear, when I say 2/3, it's not that I get out my extremely precise ruler and measure and whatever. I take my dividers, hold it up against the bezel, and just kind of go like, here-ish. So here's a topic that comes up a lot where people are like, well, I don't know, am I going to use a wire in there? Am I going to use like an actual bezel? And here's the whole thing. It depends on how much you need to raise it. Like a lot of times when you have a cabochon and the bottom is a little bit curved, we'll put just like a wire in there to raise it up a little bit. But you're raising it like a millimeter or something like that, like a relatively small amount. If you need to raise something significantly higher, like a few millimeters, to put a thick enough wire to raise it up like that, like you go insane trying to make a little circle out of it. So normally at that point, you're just going to go for sheet and you're going to cut a strip and make the inner bezel out of that. So in that case, the wire is serving the same purpose as a bezel, as an inner bezel, but it's a wire, but it's the same thing. So here's the little inner bezel that I made. Now I make my inner bezels out of fine silver because it doesn't really oxidize very much. It's nice and soft and easy to shape. But here's the thing, if you work in fine silver, which a lot of us do, you can actually fuse it. I normally do not fuse my inner bezels because I'm sure you've all noticed when you fuse your seam, it tends to melt in just a little bit. And the whole purpose of an inner bezel is to be level. To hold the stone up in the perfect position to set. So if you're starting off with a slant, more than likely you're going to be filing and sanding, and you know how that all goes, and then you sand it down and it still has a tilt, and it's a whole thing. So for me, I'm like, why don't we just bypass that whole bullshit and just solder it? Yes, we're still going to have to make sure it's level, but it's a lot easier to keep it level when you cut it level. So I have it sitting right on top of my cute little piece of solder because this is just, I think, the easiest way to do it. I'm going to put a little flux there. Like so. Like so, like so. So that's usually what I do because, you know, just like if you're soldering an inner bezel or a ring shank or anything, you want both sides of the seam to be touching the solder. If it only touches in one spot, when it flows, you just get like a lump there, as I'm sure you've all experienced from time to time. So if that happens to you, that's what happened. So I'm going to heat it from the top, and then we'll sand it a little bit to make sure it's absolutely level, and then we'll put it in there, and I'll kind of show you how mine usually fit and how we figure out really, like, does it need to come up or down. Okay, as per usual, right in for the kill, and it's over. Yay! So you see what I mean, right? Like, I'll throw that in the pickle, and I cut it relatively straight, but there's always going to be a little bit of sanding. Okay, so here's my cute little inner bezel. You see I soldered it shut, and then I just sanded it top and bottom, you know, so it's nice and level. And then this is how I make my inner bezels. Oh, look, they drop in. Look, they drop back out, thereby eliminating the hours of fuckery that will befall you if you make it super tight. And then when you adjust the height, you have to go in and out, in and out, in and out. So you see, I've saved your whole life. So in case I didn't go over this point clearly enough, unless the back is open, don't solder this in. Where can it fucking go? The stone is going to hold it in place. Just put it in there and set the stone. Every single piece I make, unless the back is open, the inner bezel is just sitting in there, hanging out. It can't do anything. So don't bother to solder that shit in. It's just another unnecessary stage to aggravate you. There's nothing wrong with that. So another thing to consider when you're doing a bezel is that you want the most light possible to bounce back to your eyeball. That's what gives you that delicious bling, you know? So what we do is, and this is an extremely ancient technique, you just want something highly polished on the bottom. So most of the time, I just take like a 30 gauge sheet of fine silver and I sand it a bit to get rid of the scratches. I throw it in a tumbler for an hour so it's super shiny like this. And then I usually just like stick it in a little baggie or an envelope or whatever. And every time I go to set, I pull it out, cut out the little shape at the bottom, because that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a little square that fits right in the bottom of here. And then I'm going to put my inner bezel on top. Now, usually for me, like I want everything as shiny as possible on the inside, regardless if like the outside piece you don't want shiny. So usually I'll take my inner bezel and this, you know what I mean? Like I'm gonna like put everything in the tumbler, make everything shiny, shiny, shiny. The more the light bounces around, the better it's gonna look. Okay. So I just want you guys to take a look. I threw that in the tumbler and I sanded it down a little bit and I have my shiny silver in there. So basically, like for me, that's what I'm looking for. Now I've been putting my stone in. I'm going to do some little tweaky adjustments because the girdle is actually not totally straight. It curves down at the points a little bit. So I'm going to do a little bit of zhuzhing and then I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's all just right. Okay, so here it is. I have the inner bezel at the right height. I've kind of shaved down the corners of the bezel a little bit because the stone had a little bit of curve, but this is like just what you're looking for, which is the bezel is just above the girdle. And basically now I'm ready to set. So now you know everything you need to know about inner bezels. And seam.